He rescued the lion cub, never expecting the little guy to chatter non-stop the whole way home. In the blistering heat of Yellowstone National Park, Wildlife Officer Ryan Hayes thought he was just pulling another dehydrated cub out of trouble, but the moment he lifted the tiny lion from that illegal snare, the cub locked eyes with him and unleashed a string of sharp, opinionated grumbles. As if scolding him for being late to the party, Ryan Hayes, We had spent years patrolling these parched valleys as a wildlife officer. He knew the signs of drought, cracked earth, shrinking water holes. Animals pushed to desperate edges. That afternoon, the sun hammered down, turning every step into a fight against dust and heat. He was checking a remote trail for signs of poaching when a thin, irritated sound cut through the haze. Not a cry for help, but a complaint, loud and clear, carried on the dry wind. He paused. The sound came again, sharper, almost annoyed, as if something out there was fed up with the situation. Ryan pushed through brittle sagebrush and found the pit, an old snare trap. Wires rusted, but still deadly. One of those setups locals still risked, despite the heavy fines. At the bottom, half covered in dust, lay a young lion cub, 4, maybe 5 months old, its golden fur matted with dirt. One front paw caught tight in the noose. The cub's sides heaved in quick, shallow breaths. But when it spotted Ryan leaning over the edge, it opened its mouth and let out the most exasperated series of chirps and growls he had ever heard from any animal. Not fear, not pain, pure attitude. The tail flicked in irritation even as the cub winced from the trap. Ryan blinked hard. He had handled everything from orphaned elk to problem bears, but never a cub that sounded ready to argue its way out of the mess. The little lion tried to shift its trapped paw, hissed once, then fired off another string of rapid grumbles that landed somewhere between protest and lecture. Ryan couldn't help the short, surprised laugh that escaped him. He reached for the bolt cutters on his belt. The heat pressed in, sweat stinging his eyes. But he worked fast, careful, steady, talking low the whole time to calm the cub. The cub watched him the entire time with narrow amber eyes, unimpressed, letting out short, bossy chirps every time he paused. When the wire finally snapped free, the cub yanked its paw back, stumbled a step, then sat down hard and gave Ryan a look that could only be described as long overdue. Ryan snorted at the cub's clear opinion. The little lion lifted its dusty head and chirped again, demanding, almost expectant. Ryan's chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. He knew the rules. Wild animals stay wild, but he also knew what it felt like to be caught somewhere you couldn't escape. Waiting for someone to show up, he slid down into the pit, scooped the shaking cub gently against his chest, and felt its small heart hammering against his ribs. The cub didn't fight. It pressed its head under his chin, muttered one tired, muffled chirp, and settled in, like it had decided this human was acceptable. For now, Ryan climbed out, holding the little body close to shield it from the wind. Whipped dust. The cub poked its head out long enough to grumble at the glaring sun, as if telling it off too. Ryan shook his head, breath fogging in the dry air despite the heat. He carried the cub down the trail, the little one already starting up a steady stream of grumbles and chirps, like it fully intended to narrate the entire walk back to the station. If you believe that protecting wildlife is the same as protecting our shared future, come along with us on this journey. These stories aren't meant to shock or stir pity. They simply remind us that every life forms part of nature's delicate balance. Every subscription is one small but powerful step towards spreading more tales of rescue, loss, and quiet hope. When you support the channel, you help shine a light on the silent saves that rarely make headlines and prove that compassion isn't weakness. It's a deliberate choice. This is the place where real human values are told through raw, honest moments. Drop a 0 or 1 in the comments if this little guy's attitude already has you smiling. Like if you want more wildlife bonds that make you laugh and think. And hit subscribe with notifications turned on so you never miss the next rescue story. Your voice keeps these journeys alive. Thank you for being here. As the sun set over the parched landscape, Ryan trudged back to the ranger station with the cub in his arms. The wind kicked up fine dust that stung his face. But he kept his grip firm on the small bundle pressed against his chest. The cub's body vibrated with each step, its tiny frame still tense from the ordeal. Yet, every few moments, a low grumble rose from it, muffled against his vest. As if commenting on the bumpy ride or the fading light, Ryan glanced down, seeing those amber eyes peek out. Narrowed in what looked like mild disapproval, he pushed open the station door with his shoulder, the hinges creaking in protest as a gust followed him inside. The ranger station was a no. Trills outpost. Walls lined with faded maps of Yellowstone's trails and shelves stacked with field guides, emergency kits, and reports on recent poaching incidents. It felt drafty, even in the heat, with thin insulation letting the outside world seep in, and isolated enough that the nearest neighbor was miles away through rugged terrain. Ryan set the cub down, gently on a clean towel spread over the wooden table near the window, where the last rays of sunlight filtered through grimy glass. The little lion blinked at the sudden change, its fur still caked with dust, and immediately let out a string of rapid grumbles, pawing at the towel as if testing its quality. Ryan moved quickly, grabbing a first aid kit from the cabinet. He inspected the injured paw under the overhead light, noting the shallow cuts from the wire but no deep damage, just bruising that would need time. The cub watched him intently, then released a drawn-out whine that sounded suspiciously like a complaint about the delay. Ryan huffed a quiet laugh, the sound surprising him in the quiet room. He dampened a cloth with warm water from the sink and dabbed at the wound, careful not to press too hard. The cub stiffened at first, its tail flicking sharply, but then it relaxed slightly, letting out a softer chirp that almost seemed appreciative, though followed by a quick grumble as if to say it could have been done better. As he worked, Ryan felt an unfamiliar weight settle in his gut. Not the usual fatigue from a long patrol, but a sense of responsibility that went beyond protocol. This wasn't just logging another rescue. This cub depended on him now, its small breaths syncing with his movements. He wrapped the paw loosely with gauze, securing it just enough to protect without restricting. The cub tested the bandage by flexing its toes, then looked up at him and chirped again, this time with a rhythmic pattern that landed like a question. Ryan nodded, as if understanding. The cub's response was a low rumble, vibrating through the table, and for the first time since picking it up, Ryan felt a small crack in the isolation he'd grown used to out here. He filled a shallow bowl with water mixed with electrolytes from his supplies and set it down. The cub sniffed it cautiously, dipped its tongue, then lapped eagerly, pausing only to grumble between sips as if critiquing the temperature. Ryan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. It was odd how the cub's constant sounds filled the space, turning the station's usual silence into something lively. He reached out to stroke its back gently, and the cub leaned into the touch, its body finally easing into a more relaxed posture, the tension from the trap fading as warmth spread through its limbs. That night, as darkness fully claimed the park, Ryan sat in the old chair by the radio, listening to the static reports of ongoing drought conditions. The cub curled on the towel, its sides rising and falling steadily. But every so often it stirred, letting out a muffled chirp that pulled his attention back. He thought about the last big rescue he'd handled, years ago, when a helicopter drop had gone wrong and he'd lost his partner Mike in the chaos of a sudden storm. No blood, no graphic details, just the empty spot left behind. The way it made patrols feel heavier ever since. He rubbed his jaw, pushing the memory aside. But the cub's next grumble cut through the quiet, drawing a reluctant smile from him. The bond was starting small, through those persistent sounds that made the station feel less empty. And for the first time in a long while, Ryan didn't mind the company. The cub shifted closer to the edge of the table, its eyes half closed, but still watching him. Ryan stood and adjusted the towel, tucking it around the small form for extra warmth against the cooling night air. The little lion let out a contented rumble, deeper this time. As it settled in fully, the day's exhaustion finally taking hold, Ryan dimmed the light and took his spot back in the chair. The radio humming low, the cub's presence changed the rhythm of the evening. Its occasional chirps, punctuating the silence like punctuation in a story he hadn't expected to tell. Over the next hour, as he reviewed patrol notes, the cub dozed but woke briefly to grumble at a distant coyote howl filtering through the walls. Ryan glanced over, amused by the feisty reaction. The cub blinked sleepily and chirped back, a short burst that seemed to affirm it. He shook his head, the laughter bubbling up again, light and unexpected. This talkative little survivor was already chipping away at the routine solitude he'd built. One grumble at a time, Ryan prepared a simple meal for himself, heating canned stew on the small stove, the aroma filling the station. The cub's nose twitched, and it lifted its head, letting out an insistent series of chirps that clearly demanded a share. He portioned out a small amount of soft meat, cooled it, and offered it on a plate. The cub sniffed, then devoured it with eager bites, pausing to grumble appreciatively between chews. The bond grew in these moments, the cubs talking, turning what could have been a quiet night into one filled with subtle humor. As the hours ticked on, Ryan checked the wound again, noting less swelling. The cub tolerated the inspection with only a few mild protests, its body now fully relaxed under his hands. He sat nearby, the chair creaking as he leaned back. And for once, the isolation of the station didn't press as hard. The cub's steady breathing and occasional soft chirp provided a new anchor, pulling him from the edges of old regrets. The night deepened, the wind outside rattling the windows lightly. Ryan powered down the radio and prepared to rest. But the cub stirred once more, letting out a questioning grumble. He reached over, his hand resting lightly on its side. Feeling the warmth, the cub settled with a final, satisfied rumble, and Ryan felt the first threads of connection solidify. Born from the cub's relentless sounds that made laughter come easier than it had in years. The next morning, the sunlight filtered through the station windows as Ryan checked on the cub. He opened the blinds to let the pale light spill across the table where the little lion had spent the night. Still curled tightly on the towel, the cub stirred at the sound of footsteps, lifting its head and letting out a long, drawn-out trill that rose and fell like a question about breakfast. Ryan smiled despite himself and moved to the sink, filling the water bowl fresh while warming a portion of soft meat from the fridge. The cub watched every motion with focused intensity, tail tip twitching, and when Ryan set the bowl down, it approached slowly, sniffed once, then dove in with enthusiastic bites punctuated by satisfied rumbles. He knelt beside the table to change the bandage, unwrapping the gauze carefully. The swelling had eased overnight, the cuts already scabbing under the dry air. The cub tolerated the cleaning with only a few short protests. Quick, sharp chirps that sounded more like reminders to be gentle than actual complaints. Ryan reapplied fresh ointment, then secured the wrap again. Keeping his movements steady and calm, the cub flexed its paw experimentally, then responded with a rhythmic purr, grumble that vibrated through the wood, almost like approval mixed with a demand for speed. Breakfast finished. Ryan carried the bowl to the small fenced yard behind the station, a patch of shaded dirt enclosed by chain link to keep curious animals out. He set the cub down on the ground, and it immediately explored, sniffing the air, batting at dry leaves, every movement full of restless energy. When Ryan stepped back inside for a moment to grab a notepad, the cub followed right to the door, letting out an insistent trill that carried clear across the yard. Ryan paused, turned, and saw the cub staring up at him with wide eyes. Tail high, he opened the door wider and let it trot in behind him. Back at the table, Ryan watched as the cub climbed onto a low stool, then leaped to the chair arm. Perching, like it owned the spot, it looked at him expectantly and released a series of rapid chirps. Head tilting, Ryan laughed outright. The sound surprising in the quiet room. The energy was undeniable. Constant motion, constant sound. And Ryan realized the cub needed a name that fit. He studied the little lion for a moment, the way it dominated the space with sheer personality despite its size. He decided on Max, a name that captured the cub's high energy and bold attitude. The cub's ears flicked forward. It blinked once, then let out a single, decisive chirp that sounded like acceptance. From then on, it was Max. Morning brought a knock at the door. Ryan opened it to find his older sister, Sarah Hayes, standing there with a thermos of coffee and a paper bag of fresh rolls from the town bakery. Sarah, Sishawu, taught at the local elementary school and made the drive out whenever she could, claiming it was to check on him, but really to make sure he wasn't disappearing into the wilderness completely. She stepped inside, eyes widening at the sight of Max perched on the chair like a king. Ryan closed the door behind her and introduced the cub simply as Max. Sarah set the bag down, approached slowly, and Max immediately turned toward her, letting out a long, curious trill that rose at the end like a greeting. Sarah crouched to Max's level. Hands visible, the cub studied her for a beat, and then hopped down to the floor and circled her boots once before, sitting squarely in front of her and releasing a bossy chirp. Sarah burst out laughing at the cub's immediate command of the situation. She glanced at Ryan, noting how his eyes softened when he looked at Max. She poured coffee for both of them and sat at the table, Max immediately jumping up to inspect the thermos. Sarah expressed her worry about Ryan living so isolated after losing his partner Mike in that difficult rescue years earlier. Ryan acknowledged the past briefly, but his focus stayed on Max, who pressed his head against Ryan's hand in a quiet gesture of comfort. Sarah smiled as Max chirped at her again, almost playfully. The cub's constant sounds and bold personality seemed to lighten the weight Ryan carried, and Sarah saw the change in her brother's demeanor. The afternoon passed, with Sarah helping Ryan prepare a larger space for Max in the corner. A low crate lined with blankets, a scratching post from spare wood, and a water dish that Max immediately tested by dipping his paw in and flicking droplets everywhere. Every time Ryan tried to set boundaries, Max responded with insistent chirps or playful grumbles, turning even simple tasks into a back and forth. Sarah watched the interaction, her expression softening as she saw how Max's presence was already bringing Ryan out of his shell. She stayed until late afternoon, engaging with Max through simple play, and the station filled with easy laughter from both siblings as the cub dominated the space with his energy. When Sarah finally stood to leave, she hugged Ryan tightly and expressed how proud she was of him for letting this connection happen. Max followed her to the door, letting out a series of farewell chirps that made her laugh again. Ryan watched her truck disappear down the dusty road, then turned back to Max, who had already returned to the chair arm and was staring at him expectantly. Ryan sat down nearby. Max immediately moved closer, resting his chin on Ryan's arm. The cub's warmth seeped through, and, for the first time that day, Ryan allowed himself to lean into it fully. The station felt fuller, the silence broken not just by Max's sounds, but by the quiet understanding growing between them all. By midday, Emily Carter arrived at the station with her vet kit. She knocked once before pushing the door open, her boots leaving faint dust prints on the threshold. Emily, a veterinarian with the regional wildlife response team, carried herself with the calm efficiency of someone used to handling unpredictable patients. She set the heavy case down and scanned the room, her gaze landing immediately on Max, perched on the table like he'd claimed it for the day. Max turned toward her, ears forward, and released a quick, sassy trill that rose sharply at the end, as if sizing her up. Ryan stood from the chair and greeted Emily. Sarah, still lingering after her morning visit, stepped forward with a small smile. Emily crouched slowly, opening her kit to pull out gloves and a stethoscope. Max watched her every move, then hopped down to the floor and sat directly in front of her, tail wrapped neatly around his paws. He let out a single, deliberate chirp, short and pointed, like he was granting permission to proceed. Emily began the exam with gentle hands. Starting at the head and working down, she checked his eyes, ears, and teeth, murmuring notes into a small recorder. Max tolerated the light, then opened his mouth wide and let out a dramatic, drawn-out grumble that vibrated through the room. Sarah covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. Ryan shook his head at Max's clear disapproval of the cold metal. Emily grinned without looking up, Noting that she had heard worse from grizzlies, and that this cub clearly had personality, Max responded by tilting his head and releasing a series of rapid, staccato chirps that sounded suspiciously like commentary on her technique. When she moved to lift the bandaged paw, Max pulled it back slightly, then planted it firmly on her glove and let out a bossy trill. Emily paused, eyebrows raised, and acknowledged the message by proceeding more slowly. She unwrapped the gauze carefully, exposing the clean, healing cuts. She observed that there was no infection and the bruising had reduced. Crediting Ryan's solid first aid, Max, apparently satisfied with the pace, leaned in and bumped her wrist with his head, followed by a softer purr, grumble that made Emily chuckle. She noted that Max was now approving her. Sarah leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching the exchange. Max demonstrated his command of the room by circling Emily once, then jumping back to the table and sitting squarely between her and Ryan, tail flicking as he released a triumphant chirp. Ryan laughed outright at Max running the show. Emily shook her head, amused, and finished the check by listening to Max's heart and lungs. The cub stayed remarkably still, only interrupting with occasional short trills that drew smiles from all three adults. The room filled with easy laughter each time Max added his input. Sassy, opinionated, impossible to ignore. Emily packed her kit and pulled out a notepad. She summarized that Max was healthy, strong, and clearly bonded fast. Noting that such attachment wasn't common this quickly in a wild cub, she asked Ryan about long-term plans, and he replied that he intended to keep Max only until the cub was ready for release. Sarah spoke up quietly, pointing out that Max was good for Ryan. Emily nodded. Then her expression shifted as she noticed the small evidence bag on the counter, the cut snare wire Ryan had saved. She examined the wire closely and observed that the style matched reports from the east boundary. With the same gauge and rust pattern, she suggested that if it was the same person, they had a repeat offender. She pulled out her phone and took photos, explaining that she would log it with Fish and Wildlife, who had been building a case on a local named Tom Briggs, cited twice already for illegal snares, but without hard proof until now. Ryan's jaw tightened at the name. Recognizing Briggs as the one running an outfitter shop near the highway who always pushed limits, Emily confirmed that tying this to him could make it a felony under the Lacey Act, with fines starting at $5,000 and possible jail time if intent was proven. She pocketed her phone and said she would file the report that day, advising Ryan to keep an eye out for more. Sarah stepped closer to Ryan and reminded him that this was why he did the work. But he didn't have to carry it all alone. She looked at Max, who had settled beside Ryan's leg, head resting on his boot. Max sensed the shift and lifted his head, pressing his nose lightly against Ryan's hand in a gentle nudge. The contact was small, warm, steady. Ryan's fingers curled slightly around the cub's ear, and Max responded with a low, soothing rumble that filled the quiet space between them. Emily watched the moment, then smiled, noting that this was exactly the bond she had mentioned. Max was comforting Ryan right now. Sarah nodded, observing that Max did this whenever Ryan got quiet. Max looked up at Ryan with those steady amber eyes and let out one more soft trill, almost a whisper. Ryan met the gaze. The three adults stood in the sunlit room, laughter from earlier still lingering, now mixed with something deeper. The recognition that Max's sassy commentary and quiet comfort were weaving everyone closer together. Emily gathered her things and said she would check back in a few days, advising Ryan to keep Max active, but not overdoing it, and complimented him on the rescue. She nodded to Sarah, noting that it was nice to meet her and that Max approved. Sarah laughed in response. Emily stepped out, the door clicking shut behind her. Sarah turned to Ryan and reminded him that he had heard Emily. Max was good for him, and he shouldn't push the cub away. Or them. Ryan didn't argue. Max hopped down, circled his legs once, then sat looking up expectantly. Ryan crouched and reassured that they weren't going anywhere yet. Max answered with a contented purr. Grumble, leaning into the touch. The afternoon stretched on with the three of them. Ryan, Sarah, and Max, settling into an easy rhythm. Sarah helped organize supplies, while Max supervised from various perches, offering chirps of approval or mild protest whenever someone moved too slowly. When Sarah tried to give Max a treat, he sniffed it, then looked to Ryan for confirmation before taking it. Sarah grinned at Max's manners when he wanted them. Ryan chuckled, noting that Max only followed rules when it suited him. Max demonstrated by batting playfully at Sarah's shoelace, then darting away when she reached for him, only to circle back and bump her hand with his head. As the light began to slant lower, Sarah prepared to leave again. She hugged Ryan, then knelt to Max, asking the cub to take care of her brother. Max let out a soft trill and pressed his forehead to her palm. Sarah stood, eyes bright, observing that Max was family now. Whether Ryan had planned it or not, Ryan walked her to the door and thanked her for coming. Sarah paused on the threshold, urging Ryan to open up a little. It was safe. She left, and Ryan closed the door, turning to find Max already back on the table, watching him. With that same steady gaze, Ryan sat beside him. Max immediately moved closer, resting his chin on Ryan's arm. The cub's warmth seeped through, and for the first time that day, Ryan allowed himself to lean into it fully. The station felt fuller, the silence broken not just by Max's sounds, but by the quiet understanding growing between them all. A few days into the week, a rescue plane buzzed overhead during a supply drop. The low rumble started distant, then built fast as the aircraft banked over the ridge, engines cutting through the still air like a blade. Ryan was outside the station, stacking fresh water jugs from the drop, when the sound hit Max, who had been batting at a loose leaf in the yard. Two's reet, motion, his ears pinned flat, body dropping low to the ground, and a roar. Panicked trill tore from his throat, high, sharp, nothing like the sassy chirps from before. The cub bolted toward the station porch, scrambling under the low decking, pressing himself against the far wall, in tight. Trembling silence broken only by quick, shallow breaths. Ryan dropped the jug he held, heart slamming against his ribs. The plane's roar echoed off the hills, pulling up memories he usually kept locked down. The crack of rotors during that final supply, run years back, the sudden tilt of the bird. Mike's voice cutting off mid sentence over the intercom. No crash details, just the empty aftermath. The way the quiet afterward had settled heavier than any storm. Ryan forced a breath, knelt at the porch edge, and peered into the shadows. Max's wide eyes gleamed back, pupils blown. every muscle locked. He spoke low and even, the tone he used on skittish animals, reassuring that it was just a plane bringing supplies and nothing more. Max didn't move, but another small, broken trill escaped. Raw fear, instinct overriding everything. Ryan lay flat on the dirt, extending one hand slowly under the decking, telling Max he was right there and not going anywhere. The cub's breathing hitched, but he inched forward a fraction, nose twitching toward Ryan's fingers. Inside the station, Sarah had heard the engines and stepped to the window just in time to see Max disappear. She came out quietly, crouching beside Ryan. She observed that Max was terrified. Ryan nodded once, acknowledging that the sound had triggered something. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, noting that it had triggered something for Ryan too. She didn't push, just stayed close. Ryan kept talking to Max in that steady rhythm, reassuring him of safety. Max hesitated, then pressed his forehead against Ryan's palm, the body still shaking but no longer retreating. The plane circled once more before banking away, the sound fading into the distance until only wind remained. Max stayed under the porch for another minute, then crawled out slowly, pressing tight against Ryan's side. Ryan sat up, lifting the cub into his lap without a word. Max buried his face against Ryan's chest, letting out a low, uneven hum, a rough, wild version of a purr that vibrated straight through him. Ryan rested his chin on Max's head, acknowledging that he had felt it too. Sarah sat on the porch step beside them and recalled how, when they were kids, Ryan would climb the old oak in the backyard every time a storm rolled in. She would sit at the bottom and talk him down until the thunder stopped. Ryan exhaled, remembering that she always knew what to say. Sarah smiled faintly, recalling that Ryan had been scared of the noise but never admitted it. Mike used to tease him about it during shifts, saying Ryan jumped at every loud engine like it was personal. Ryan's throat tightened, but he didn't pull away. Acknowledging that Mike had been right, Max shifted in Ryan's lap, the hum deepening, steady now, as if anchoring him. Ryan's hand moved automatically to stroke along the cub's spine, feeling the small body relax muscle by muscle. Sarah watched and observed that Max was doing the same thing for Ryan that she used to, just in his own way. Ryan looked down at Max, who lifted his head and met his eyes with that calm, amber gaze. The cub nudged Ryan's chin once, then settled back with another soft hum. Ryan swallowed and admitted that he had thought he had it handled. The quiet, the patrols, keeping distance. Then this little guy showed up and wouldn't let him stay quiet. Max responded with a gentle trill, pressing closer. Sarah leaned in, suggesting that maybe that was the point. He didn't have to carry it alone anymore. Ryan didn't answer right away. He just held Max, letting the cub's warmth seep in, the hum steady against his chest like a second heartbeat. They stayed on the porch as the afternoon light shifted, Max gradually easing out of his tension. He began to groom Ryan's sleeve with small, careful licks, then let out a contented rumble when Ryan scratched behind his ears. Sarah stood, eventually, saying she would head back soon but would come tomorrow, so they could take Max for a short walk and see how he did. Ryan nodded his thanks. Sarah paused at the steps, telling Ryan he was doing good. Both of them, she left quietly, and Ryan remained outside with Max until the sun dipped lower. Inside, later, Ryan set Max on the blanket pile he had made in the corner. The cub circled once, then curled up, but kept one eye on Ryan. When Ryan sat nearby, Max stretched out a paw and rested it on his knee. Humming softly, Ryan covered the paw with his hand, acknowledging that Max had pulled him back today. Just like that, Max's eyes half closed, the hum continuing, steady and sure. The evening settled in with the station's familiar sounds. The creak of wood cooling, distant owl calls. But Max's presence changed the weight of them. Ryan leaned back against the wall, Max shifting to lie across his lap. The low rumble never fully stopping. For the first time in years, the memories of Mike didn't cut as deep. They lingered. But Max's quiet comfort dulled the edges, turning sharp grief into something bearable. As night fell, Ryan carried Max to the table for a final check. The cub let out a sleepy trill, then pressed his head under Ryan's chin in a deliberate nudge. Ryan whispered that they were okay. Max answered, with one last soft hum before drifting off. The body relaxed completely against him. Ryan stayed there long after, hand resting on Max's back, feeling the steady rise and fall. The bond solidifying in the silence that no longer felt empty. Midway through the second week, Ryan started light training sessions with Max in the clearing. The small open area behind the station had become their routine spot. Flat ground, dusted with dry pine needles, ringed by sparse trees that offered shade without blocking the view. Ryan marked a circle in the dirt with his boot heel and set Max down at the center. Max looked up at him, ears perked, and let out an immediate questioning trill as if asking, what came next? Ryan held up one hand, palm out, signaling for Max to sit. The cub tilted his head, then plopped down dramatically on his haunches with a loud huff that sounded like exaggerated surrender. Ryan nodded approval. He took 2 steps back and signaled for Max to stay. The cub remained seated for exactly 3 seconds before springing forward, bounding straight to Ryan's feet and bumping his leg with his head while releasing a triumphant chirp. Ryan laughed at the failed attempt and reset the drill. They repeated the exercise. Each time Ryan signaled stay, Max held position a little longer. 4 seconds, then 5, before launching himself with playful energy. When he finally remained seated through a full 10 seconds, Ryan rewarded him with a small piece of dried meat. Max snatched it, chewed quickly, then looked up expectantly for more, letting out an insistent trill that rose in pitch. Ryan shook his head at the cub's greed and reminded him one at a time. Next came the come command. Ryan walked 10 paces away, crouched, and called Max. The cub stared at him for a long beat, then turned deliberately in the opposite direction and strutted off a few steps before glancing back with a sassy chirp. Ryan burst out laughing at the intentional defiance. Max whipped around and trotted over at full speed, leaping the last few feet to land on Ryan's knee, purring, grumbling the whole way. Ryan caught him, steadying the cub and acknowledging that Max had won that round. Sessions continued daily, always kept short to avoid overtaxing Max's healing paw. The cub learned quickly but argued every step, protesting with sharp trills when Ryan corrected him, celebrating with dramatic chirps when he succeeded. Ryan found himself responding constantly. The one-sided exchanges, filling the clearing with sound. When Max flopped sideways in exaggerated defeat, Ryan offered encouragement, and the cub popped back up, tail high. One afternoon, as Ryan reset the circle for another round. The ground trembled faintly. A low rumble built. Not thunder, but something deeper. Ryan froze. The drought had cracked the earth in places, and loose soil on the slope above the clearing had been shifting for days. Max's ears shot up, body tensing, before Ryan could react. A section of the bank gave way. Dry dirt and rocks sliding in a sudden rush straight toward them. Ryan lunged to scoop Max, but the cub was already moving. Max bolted forward, positioning himself between Ryan and the slide, and let out a piercing, urgent scream. Raw, loud, nothing like his usual sass. The sound cut through the roar of falling earth. Ryan stumbled back, just as the first rocks hit where he had stood. He grabbed Max mid-leap, rolling them both clear as debris crashed past, kicking up dust that choked the air. They landed hard on the far side of the clearing. Ryan coughed, shielding Max with his body until the slide settled. Silence followed, broken only by their breathing. Max clung to him, trembling, but lifted his head and let out a shaky trill, relief mixed with scolding. Ryan held him tight. Realizing the cub had just saved him, he sat up slowly, checking Max over. No injuries, just dust in his fur. The cub pressed against his chest, humming low and steady. Ryan looked at the fresh scar on the slope, heart still pounding. If Max hadn't screamed, the outcome could have been different. He rubbed his face, acknowledging that somehow the cub had known a ranger from the next post had been nearby. Camera phone, out for routine footage. He captured the whole thing. The slide, Max's scream, Ryan diving clear. The video ended with Max clinging to Ryan, both covered in dust, but safe. Within hours, the clip spread through the park network, first to staff, then to local groups. Comments rolled in fast. People noted how the cub seemed to call Ryan's name, laughed at the bossy attitude, even in danger, and marveled at the pure bond. Ryan didn't see the video until evening, when Emily texted it with a note that Max had gone viral and people loved the way he called Ryan. Ryan watched it on the station's old laptop. Max curled beside him. The cub's scream echoed from the speakers, sharp, commanding, and Ryan felt a mix of pride and something deeper. Max looked up at the sound of his own voice, tilted his head, then let out a soft chirp as if acknowledging it. The next day brought more messages. Park visitors asked about the talking lion cub. Locals shared the clip, and even a news outlet picked it up for a short segment. Ryan kept things low, but the attention made him smile when people mentioned Max's personality. Max, oblivious, continued his training with the same energy, arguing commands, celebrating wins, always ending sessions by pressing close to Ryan like nothing had changed. The bond had shifted again. What started as rescue and care now carried mutual protection. Max had faced danger for him, and Ryan felt the weight of that trust settle permanently. The clearing sessions resumed the following morning, Max bounding ahead with renewed vigor, chirping instructions of his own. Ryan followed, laughing more freely. The memory of the slide, no longer just fear, but proof of something unbreakable between them. Word spread quickly through the park community as the video gained views. The clip of Max's scream during the slide spread first among rangers and staff, shared in internal group chats. Within a day, it jumped to local social media pages for Yellowstone visitors and residents. People posted reactions, noting how the little lion seemed to yell for Ryan, commenting on his attitude, surpassing half the bears out there, and laughing at how bossy he remained even in danger. Views climbed steadily, hitting thousands by evening, then tens of thousands overnight, as shares reached wider wildlife and adventure groups. The station phone started ringing the next morning. A family from Bozeman asked if they could stop by to see the famous cub. An older couple from Gardner brought a small carved wooden lion figure wrapped in cloth, saying they had seen the video and thought Ryan's partner might like it. Max hopped onto the porch rail to inspect the gift, sniffing it thoroughly before letting out a proud trill that made the couple laugh. Ryan accepted it with a nod, noting that Max approved. Visitors trickled in over the following days. Park regulars, hikers passing through, even a school group whose teacher had shown the clip in class. Ryan kept interactions short and supervised, setting Max on a low platform in the yard so everyone could see without crowding. Max performed shamelessly, sitting tall when called, tilting his head at questions, and responding to every new face with a series of varied trills and chirps. When one visitor asked if Max could talk on command, Ryan gave the signal, and Max let out a dramatic, rising trill that ended in a huff. The small crowd burst into laughter. Ryan noted dryly that Max had opinions, and the cub answered with another chirp, as if agreeing. Gifts accumulated on the station porch. A braided rope toy from a local artisan, a soft blanket from a retiree who said it reminded her of her old cat, homemade treats wrapped in paper that Max sniffed and then batted around playfully before eating. Each time a new person approached, Max greeted them with a quick inspection, circling once, sniffing boots, then sitting in front of them and releasing a single, expectant chirp. People melted at the display, commenting that he was like a little king. Max puffed his chest and trilled again, drawing more chuckles. Sarah came by most afternoons, bringing coffee and watching the growing stream of visitors. She stood beside Ryan one day as a group of teenagers laughed at Max's latest performance. He had batted a treat away before snatching it back with a triumphant chirp. Sarah smiled, observing how the whole community was showing up for him. Ryan watched Max hop down to greet a new arrival, agreeing that they loved him. Sarah nodded, adding that they loved what he stood for. A cub who saved a ranger, talked back, and brought people together. That was rare. Amid the attention, the report Emily filed moved fast. Fish and wildlife officers followed the snare wire evidence to Tom Briggs's property. They found similar traps in his outbuilding. Same goga, same roost, and matched them to the one Ryan had cut. Briggs was brought in for questioning. The charges stuck. Multiple counts of illegal trapping on federal land during a protected season. Plus prior, citation. The judge imposed a fine of $5,000 and a 1-year hunting ban, with mandatory community service at a wildlife education center. Word reached the station through Emily's update. Briggs was out on bail, but wouldn't be setting any more snares anytime soon. Ryan exhaled in relief, noting one less threat out there. Max, lounging nearby, let out a soft trill as if in agreement. The community response grew beyond visits. A local conservation group started a small fund for drought relief in the park, citing Max's story as inspiration. Their post noted that if a cub could step up, so could the community. Linking back to the video, donations came in steadily, Small amounts from individuals who wanted to help protect more animals like Max. Ryan received emails thanking him for the rescue and for giving people hope in a tough season. Sarah stayed longer one evening after the last visitor left. She sat on the porch with Ryan. Max curled between them. She expressed quietly how proud she was of him. Not just for saving Max, but for letting this happen. The way people were coming together was because of what the two of them had. Ryan looked at Max, who lifted his head and nudged Sarah's hand. Sarah laughed softly, noting that Max had started it and Ryan had let him finish it. That was the difference. Max shifted to press against Ryan's side, letting out a low, steady rumble that vibrated through both of them. The station lights glowed, warm, against the cooling night. The sounds of the park settling around them. Crickets, distant owl calls. But Max's presence made the space feel protected, connected. Visitors kept coming the next days. A ranger with a new toy. A family leaving a note, thanking Ryan for showing that compassion matters. Max greeted each one with his signature chirp, tail high, as if he understood the role he now played. Ryan watched it all unfold. The laughter, the gifts, the quiet support. The video had sparked something larger. A reminder that bonds like this one could ripple outward, touching people who never set foot in the clearing. Max, oblivious to the wider impact, simply stayed close, his trills and rumbles filling every moment with life. The community embraced them both. And in return, Ryan felt the isolation he'd carried begin to fade, replaced by a network of faces, voices, and quiet acts of care. As the third week drew to a close, the department reviewed Max's case. The email arrived early that morning, forwarded from Emily with a brief note that there was a decision meeting today and they wanted Ryan's input. Ryan read it twice, then looked at Max, who was stretched out on the porch in a patch of sunlight, tail flicking lazily. The cub lifted his head at the sound of Ryan's footsteps, letting out a soft, inquiring trill. Ryan crouched beside him and explained that they were deciding where Max would go next. Max blinked slowly, then bumped Ryan's knee with his forehead, as if the matter was already settled. The review took place via video call from the station's small office. Emily joined from her clinic, along with two senior biologists from Yellowstone's wildlife management team and a representative from the Fish and Wildlife Service. They reviewed Max's health records, the video evidence of his bond with Ryan, and the ongoing drought conditions that had made standard release protocols riskier. The lead biologist spoke first, noting that Max had imprinted strongly. Releasing him into the wild without monitoring could lead to failure, as seen with other hand, raised cubs, disorientation, inability to hunt effectively. But he was healthy, strong, and clearly adapted to human presence in a controlled way. Emily nodded on screen, observing that the attachment was mutual. Ryan had provided consistent care, and Max had shown protective behavior. Keeping him in a monitored habitat within the park made sense. Supervised release into a designated zone where they could track him, supplement if needed, and ensure he integrated without full independence risks. The Fish and Wildlife representative added that it aligned with precedent cases for orphaned predators. They authorized long-term residency in the Northeast Quadrant Preserve, fenced buffer, natural forage, regular checks. Ryan would have access passes to visit as often as his schedule allowed. A formal agreement would be signed, But this kept Max safe and allowed the bond to continue. Ryan listened without interrupting. When asked for his thoughts, he spoke steadily, saying that if it gave Max the best shot, he was in. He didn't want the cubs struggling out there alone. Max, who had wandered into the office and jumped onto the desk, sat beside the laptop and let out a single, decisive chirp that drew quiet chuckles from the call participants. The biologist smiled, noting that it seemed unanimous. Papers were signed electronically that afternoon. Max would stay in Yellowstone's protected area, a large, natural enclosure with monitored boundaries, where staff could observe from afar and intervene only if necessary. Ryan would have access passes for regular visits. No restrictions on time spent. The decision felt right. Not a full release into uncertainty, but a middle ground that honored Max's wild nature while preserving what they had built. The following day, Ryan drove to the boundary zone, with Max in a secure carrier. The preserve sat in a quiet valley, grass still green in patches despite the drought, ringed by ridges that kept it sheltered. Staff met them at the gate, opened the carrier, and stepped back. Max emerged slowly, sniffing the air. Ears forward, he looked at Ryan once, then trotted a few paces into the grass. Tail high. Ryan stayed at the fence line. Watching, Max explored methodically, rolling in dry earth, batting at a low branch, testing the space. After 20 minutes, he circled back, stopping a short distance away and looking directly at Ryan. The cub opened his mouth and let out a long, clear call. Rov, carrying, unmistakably directed at him. It echoed off the ridges, deep and resonant. Ryan's breath caught. Max called again, louder, holding the note. Ryan lifted a hand, saying he was there. Max stood still for a moment, then bounded forward, stopping just inside the boundary and pressing his forehead to the wire. Humming low and steady, Ryan knelt on his side, hand against the fence. Max leaned in, the hum vibrating through the metal. They stayed like that until the sun shifted lower. Max finally stepped back, turned, and trotted deeper into the preserve, pausing once to look back and trill softly. Ryan watched until the cub disappeared into the trees, the call still ringing in his ears. Visits became routine. Ryan drove out every few days, sometimes with Sarah, sometimes alone. Max always appeared at the boundary, greeting him with that same clear call. Now, a familiar signal between them. Staff reported Max thriving, hunting small prey, exploring the full range, but returning to the fence line whenever Ryan's truck approached. The bond held, quiet and constant. Across the wire, Sarah came with him one evening as the light turned golden. They sat on the tailgate, watching Max pace the boundary. He stopped in front of them, letting out a series of soft trills, then pressed his side to the fence. Sarah reached through to scratch his ear, commenting that he was still talking Ryan's ear off. Ryan smiled, noting that Max never stopped. Sarah leaned against him, observing that this showed compassion saves lives. Not just Max's, but Ryan's. Protecting wildlife like this balanced their future, giving them something worth coming back to. Ryan nodded, agreeing that it did. Max hummed in response, the sound low and content. Sarah continued quietly, noting that what happened with Tom, the fine, the ban, was a reminder. Break the rules. Face the consequences. But do right. And things hold together. Ryan looked at Max, acknowledging that the cub had shown him that first. The preserve remained Max's home. Monitored and protected, Ryan's visits continued. Each one met with that familiar call from the trees. The community kept tabs. Updates shared online. Donations steady for drought relief. The story settled into something enduring. A cub who refused to be silent. A ranger who learned to listen. And a reminder that protecting what matters creates balance that lasts.